Hey guys, so we're going to do some hard surface sculpting, and we're going to start with the default cube, go into sculpt mode, and turn on dynamic topology, symmetry X. So hard surface sculpting in Blender is actually not that easy. It's I wouldn't say you would want to do it to try to create a end result for the most part, and maybe just use it to create guide meshes if you would. So like template meshes, or just really have a better time kind of like creatively exploring shapes and forms and whatnot. But if you tweak some of the tools, you can do some rather interesting things. So what we're going to do, and we're not going to use Dyno Topo for the whole thing, we're going to use the remesher. So I'm going to hit R and then Control R. And let's tweak some tools here real quick. So something that's kind of interesting is that the flatten tool kind of does this. It pushes out. You can actually set it to positive, and it kind of does this number as well. So when you hold Control, basically, that's what it's going to do. But it's kind of, it's useful perhaps, but it's just a little bit odd using it because it likes to push up all the time. So you can do things like set normal and plane on, and then you can go ahead and start using that like that, and you'll see we can actually push like infinitely out if we wanted to with that normal plane option. But check this out, it gets better. We're gonna turn those off. We're just gonna turn auto smooth on to the max, and we'll use it like that. Okay. So what this allows you to do is something like beveling, which is pretty interesting. Okay. So you can kind of round edges a little bit easier for whatever reason. Turn the strength down maybe with Shift F. And so it's kind of a cool little tool to have there. Now, the crease tool. Set the fall off sharper. And radius on for your pin pressure sensitivity if you're using a pen. And I'm using a tablet, just a cheap UN. And you can see here, it's very soft, right? Like if we use very little strength pressure when sketching here, so we can kind of pin things in very easily. And so this is a way a traditional sculptor might go about doing things with something like a pencil or whatnot. And so this is very effective if we wanted to start working with it in this manner. All right, and so the scrape tool, let's talk about this thing real quick. Scrape tool by default is actually not really that bad. But a lot of you guys are going to use it wrong. You'll start just going back and forth with it. And you see it digs into the surface and creates kind of a little rounded shape. Don't use it like that. Use it in single strokes. Okay, just quick single strokes across the surface. Scrape things back a little bit, and then don't bother with it no more. Okay, that's pretty much how you're going to end up tightening these edges up over here. Now, of course, there are some other additional options in here that you can toy around with. Now, everything, all these options, try it on every brush you have, okay? No joke. They all behave just slightly different, and it's rather interesting. But plane trim happens to be one of them. So if you set that to something like 0.1, we'll see here, it does this number, okay? And so it's still going to dig a little bit, but it will tighten up on an edge quite easily, okay? The only problem with this one, though, is it starts to act a little weird in some areas. So this scraper by far is much better set like this, okay? So we have another scrape and fill tool over here. This one behaves slightly different. I don't know exactly what's changed in it or what's different, but it does behave slightly different. And you can make those same adjustments over here and use it, and you'll see it it's just a subtlety to it that makes it behave different, right? But you can turn on normal and plane over here as well. And so a lot of you have probably tried using layer tool, right? And layer tool, usually you can use persistent base with it. So I'm going to turn it on, tap that a few times, set it to negative. If we right click, we can change the height. Okay, and so what this does is it lets you just push down like you're extruding. Okay, and so this is cool, but because we have the persistent base, if we start somewhere else, we can run it into the other sections here, right? Like that. So that's pretty awesome. Here's a trick to this though. When you're done using this tool, a lot of times, like if you restart Blender, for example, you lose that persistent base. You can't use it no more, unfortunately. And so that's a little bit of a problem. There's kind of a way to deal with that a little bit. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This scrape and fill tool, or fill and scrape tool. When you turn normal and plane on, it's going to do just similar to what we did with the flatten brush earlier. If we were to take a draw tool and just hold Control and push it in a little bit, smooth it a bit, okay, and we use this fill and scrape tool. If we hold Control to scrape, we have those options turned on. See what's happening here. It's flattening the surface, right? I might have to hit Control R and remesh it real quick. But we're starting to dig into the surface there, almost like we're using the layer tool, which is nice. If we just let go of Control, we can fill that little area, and then hold Control again, and keep working, okay? So this is pretty cool, but it's kind of the same idea as the layer tool in essence, but you don't have to have that persistent base, okay? So you can go around and dig into a surface and just work it like such. All right, and so all you're going to have to do is control the depth with your other tools, right? So if we make it a little deeper and then use that same tool again, you can see it has a slight angle to it, maybe not the angle we want, but we could definitely go in and use like clay strips real quick. Try to get it flattened to a normal we want. I'm just using Shift to smooth it. And so now we can definitely start scraping away in this area where we needed to do that. All right. And let's say you went too far with it. Like maybe we just did a little too much. You can also just use the regular fill and start to push this back out. Now, unfortunately, it is going to be flat, right? So if your surface underneath was curved, it wouldn't work out too well. But it's definitely something you can do or try to utilize. So with that out of the way, the smooth tool, all right? A lot of people don't understand this one. You use it, default settings, you just start smoothing. It's pretty easy to use, right? Here's a trick about this one. I'll set it to constant, but you don't have to do this. I'm going to crank the strength up here. If we work the smooth tool in an area with the fall off to constant, you can see it clearer. It is a Laplacian smooth, so it means it's flattening the normal underneath the brush. Okay, so it's actually a flattened brush, more or less. It behaves something like a sander would in real life. And as a result, you can actually use it in that manner right there. So now we have this ability to kind of run around our mesh here. You know, we hit R and crank up the resolution quite a bit. Control R, we see we're at 314,000 faces now. But we can get quite a bit of detail going on any individual object. Now, of course, there's a lot more that goes into hard surface sculpting. This is just barely scraping the surface of it. There's definitely different kind of brush strokes, like using, for example, let's say the in Blender 3.6, you would press E. I think it's Control E in Blender for bring up the stroke menu, but the curve tool, right, for example. And this one's pretty simple. You hold Control and right click, and you can set up some curves like this, and it's view dependent, so you don't want to rotate your view, but then you would just hit enter and boom, you can set up a stroke like such. Pretty simple and straightforward, right? Press A twice, X, and you can delete that, and you can go around and do more of those all day long. So it's a fun little tool there to make nicer strokes, perhaps, right? Okay, so that's that. And so what you're trying to do is you're just trying to create a mesh that you can potentially retopo and turn into something rather crazy cool later on, right? That's the main idea. The flatten tool, we should be able to set this to plane trim. One of these will do it. I'm trying to figure out which one it was. Probably the scraper, actually, now that I think about it. Let's take that scraper. Just turn on normal and plane. We almost got it working. There you go, see? We can just use it as like a plane trim, basically. So that's quite good. It will, unfortunately, dig a little bit of an arc, so sometimes you got to work maybe the different corners or whatever. It's probably a better option for this too, but for now, that's kind of what that setup is there. And so you can use it very light. And we can go around and just kind of scrape things up a little bit as needed, okay? And so all combined together, you have a decent set of tools now to go at your projects here, but we also have the pinch tool, which can be quite good. So you might just want to utilize this thing and tighten up some edges perhaps as well. You can tighten them up a little bit. Just feather it in, short strokes, very light. Okay, and that should work out pretty well. So we can go back to that scraper. Should be able to hit this edge here. You'll see what it's doing. It starts to dig to the side like that. We could try changing the normal radius to something smaller like 0.1, 0.2. It should not maybe dig in quite as fast over to the other side. So we should be able to scrape right on the edge a little bit. All right. Like I was saying about the smooth tool, we'll set it back to smooth. Okay, and we can set it to, no, we don't have to set nothing else. Set the strength down though. We know it's a flattening, right? Like it's got a flattening effect to it. So it behaves like a sander. When you're doing like woodwork, you're sanding, you would go in one direction and you would go in the other direction. Right? And then if you're using like an orbital sander, it'd be doing little tiny circles all over the place. So these are the kind of strokes you might want to think about when you're working with sculpting tools. Up and down, left and right, cross sections, and then maybe little circles. The scraper itself, if you do it really carefully in little circles, you can actually get some interesting kind of sharpening effects all over the place, which is kind of fun. But in reality, I think this one works best in just the single strokes there. But with low strength, you could probably do the circles and even almost polish the thing. So it's kind of a nice little technique. Put that out of the way though. You can do that with the smooth tool as well. The smooth tool, if you were to turn on under the brush settings here, area normal, okay? You can set this to whatever you want, but like say like 10, maybe 0.1. Just play around with these, all right? But you'll see we can actually make it behave almost very similar, at least, to H polish brush and ZBrush. It's very close. And so, but unfortunately it doesn't hold on a curve very well. You see it tries to stay kind of flat. So you have to do it in like little sections and then you get chunky borders or whatever. So you could tweak those settings around and try out different things there perhaps. Maybe you'll get better results out of it. But that's going to be up to you, okay? Because if you turn that fall off up, you see what happens. So I was playing around with this a little bit, turning the limit all the way to the max. And just letting it go, basically. Turning that fall off down really far, just seeing what would happen. And it doesn't really help it much, but it was interesting, I thought. So let's do like a 45 degrees, maybe. Yeah, so it's rather cool that you can do that. Now, here's the thing, though. When it comes time to like restart Blender, you're going to lose all your brush settings, right? And the unfortunate part about Blender, like the worst part about it, I think, was with the worst part of its sculpt mode anyways, is the brushes, you can create new ones and start lining them up in here. It's just got a really weird, funky management system of setting these brushes up. And so when you do these setups like this, it's going to, like, you could create new brushes all day long. Trust me, I've done it. I've saved them all, a bunch of them out before. But it's like every time you reinstall Blender or you reset, you got to re-import them, or you make a little tiny change. You got to like delete your old brush from your startup scene if you keep them in your startup scene. It gets annoying, basically. That's what I'm getting at. And it causes too many problems, in my opinion. So just get used to this idea that when you're working with these brushes, what did I change on this that makes it act so, oh, plane trim, that's why. Okay. Just get used to this idea that you're going to have to change these things and tweak them quite a bit. Okay. It's just something that's going to end up happening. And so if you ever tweak them and you're working in a project, it's not working right, you come over to this menu, you can just click reset brush here. Okay. So you can always set them back up to the defaults real quick and then tweak them some more and then see what you can get going. This one's starting to behave a little odd here. And for whatever reason, I found that even though you might turn it back into what appears to be mostly the default settings, sometimes they'll start acting a little strange and you might have to reset them anyways. All right, so just keep that in mind. But the scraper by default, low strength, and just taking your time going through using that, comboed up with the smooth tool, because we now know what it does. We can get some pretty cool results going, actually. You just don't want to go across the edges with the smooth tool. For the most part, it causes little issues like that. All right. All right, so we can, in fact, hard surface sculpt, but these aren't very pretty meshes by the end of it, usually. No matter how much time and effort you put into it, it's really hard to get them to look just perfect, you know? So the idea is to get it, you know, well enough that you could retopo it. That's the main goal. You're not trying to do, you know, this isn't ZBrush. We're not gonna beat ZBrush, basically. Not here in Blender, anyways. So what you want to do is just have fun with it. Sculpt out forms that you find interesting, and like that's, yeah, okay, there we go. Felt like it wasn't behaving right. Start figuring out the kind of forms and shapes you want to create. A big overall ideas. Use it as a modeling aid, and don't forget, you know, when you're sculpting here, you have all your modeling tools available to you. Do not take that for granted. You know, if you need a cylinder in here, create a cylinder and bring it in. Don't, you know, you don't always have to rely on these tools necessarily. So, for example, if I want to turn on box cutter and I want to go ahead and use the Ingon cutter, turn it to destructive and turn the live preview off. Okay. But now you can go through here and you can do booleans all day as long as it's low enough poly. You don't have the live update taking place, so as soon as you double click or whatever, it's going to do the boolean, and that's it, right? There's no boolean modifier anymore. And so we can go back into sculpt mode, hit Control R, remesh it, and you can see pretty clean right off the bat there. So we can take the resolutions up if we need to. As high as your system can handle, I guess, is perfectly acceptable. But at some point, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up retopoing this. And if you were to use quad remesher and you had a bunch of little micro details and stuff, it's not going to catch them. It's going to skip right past them and won't see it. So that means you have to manually retopo, which isn't really a big deal. So we're going to touch on that here in this video as well. Oh, when you're doing this type of boolean, I'm going to use bool tools, but you could use another add-on if you wanted, but do a destructive boolean. So we're doing auto boolean difference with bool tools. Control Shift and B will bring up bool tools menu when you enable the add-on, and just go ahead and do a difference. You can see we got something like that going now. So if we want to continue sculpting, we can, no problems. But like I was saying, we have to retopo, fortunately. With that in mind, we can turn box cutter off before we start cutting something by accident. And let's go over Retopo just real quick so you guys understand how to take these to more appropriate model level, I guess. So we're going to create a plane. I want to make sure these are centered, and they keep showing up off-centered. There you go. Now we're going to turn on snapping. We're going to do face project, medium point, align rotation. You can turn all of those on if you want. And Blender 4 menu will be slightly different. But if we go ahead and switch this down, also, once again, Blender 4 has a new menu for this, but a little button up there. Retopology, okay? So what this is going to do is if I hit Alt-Z, hit S and scale, and then start moving, you see what happened here? It's projected to the surface now with that snapping setting, right? So we can grab vertices, we can press G, move them around. And this is view dependent. So if you have, for example, like mesh that runs around as a loop all the way around the model, you select that whole loop and move it. And the moment you move it, it's all going to shift over and snap to this front side here. Don't do that, okay? It's a big problem. But you can keep these things relatively simple at first. And just go for big shapes first. Just start knocking it out and hammering it out, basically. So you can see here, this one I want to shift that way, and then I want to go like that. Okay, so if you don't know anything about topology, And it helps to know a little bit about subdivision modeling and whatnot. But you can actually kind of learn subdivision by doing this, because you can kind of see where things are going to want to change directions, and you might have to lay out the mesh a little bit different in little pieces and parts, basically. So like right here, I'm going to do a loop cut up, place that all appropriately. Okay. You can see this kind of wants to go this way. And then, like, where do we go from here? Well, let's just follow the single vertex first. Maybe we do something like that. Right? So we can take these two edges, press F, and we can keep running with this idea, or we can do the whole edge. We can hit E and extrude it out. But we can also hit Control and right-click. That's a cheater way of doing it. So don't be afraid of cheating when you're working on your projects. Saves you time, saves you effort. That's what the add-ons are all about. It's so that you can get things done quicker and faster. You guys that don't want to use add-ons, I understand, because that's how I learned Blender. I was not using any add-ons, but at a certain point, you're going to want to start exploring those add-ons for sure. And right now, you got to do one here and one there. So that'll fill to there. So that's creating an E-pole here. This is kind of like an inset corner, if you would. I talked about a lot of this in that topology fundamentals video. Could be quite good if you check that one out if you haven't. So now we get to go through this whole process here of working this out. You see I'm running out of detail over here, right? Like it's just it's not working out. So this is going to be a little interesting corner for sure, by the looks of it. I'm going to dissolve this. Might push that back a little, because this needs to stay up here. So, but I need an extra edge, because basically what's happening is if the kind of topo we want in this area, it looks something like this, right? Where there's an extra face there. We don't have one over here. Could try running this through, right? And then we could do, so use the knife tool, run it through. Maybe be able to dissolve that. And push that down maybe there. That would go up there. Okay, see? Somehow we worked it out. You want to try to keep things as perfect little squares as much as possible. Not always going to be the easiest challenge there, but it's definitely something you're going to want to try to do. And when you slide things around by hitting GG twice, a lot of times you just need to press G and move things a little bit. Now this mesh will more than likely be very similar to your sculpt. So if your sculpt's pretty rough, there's a good odd chance you might end up with some of that roughness in your retopo. And so you'll have to figure out how to go about dealing with that at a certain point, but usually when you are working on this later on, you'll see the little discrepancies, and then you'll actually correct those things by just doing like Alt-S maybe and scaling things out a little bit, or doing it with a single vertex. You might take things like this, like if we wanted this area flat, this one vertex, we want it flat with everything else. We can do things like smooth laplation. That's the same as smoothing in sculpt mode. It just flattens that vertex out perhaps, all right? Right now it's not doing it, but you'll use smooth, more than likely you'll use smooth laplation or smooth vertices, and trying to push them out with Alt-S is a good odd chance you'll end up doing things like that. So I have a feeling this one's going to do something kind of weird like this. I don't know for sure yet, but sometimes you got to deal with like little weird issues. So this wants to be its own thing down here, but it wants to go in this direction, see? And then I'm guessing these two will meet up again at some point. That'll be a triangle. So you can see we got two triangles. We can connect them like that possibly. And that subdivides later on. We'll get something like that. May be what we want, may not be what we want. So we'll find that out later though. All right, let's go in edit mode again. We'll leave them as triangles for now. And so you can always modify your mesh as well. So like if something just doesn't sit right, like it doesn't look like it's correct, you can always just change your model, no problems. Now I just personally, I just end up using extrusions a lot, but you certainly can do that control right clicking and get around this thing very fast even. Of course, there's other little add-ons that people have shown on YouTube quite a bit, like different little add-ons for just Retopo. I'm not gonna say some of them aren't useful. Some of them actually look very useful, but in general, I don't find this to be that hard of a way of working here. It's not that challenging to do this, right? So, for example, if I run this edge all the way over to here, and then I run it to there, stop. Well, actually, you know, we could do like E and extrude all the way over to like here, and we'll connect it to that one. We need 2 additional edges, so you can loop cut an edge where there's nothing on it, and you can mouse wheel it up and add more vertices. So you could do 2. You can control click all the way around real quick. Control F and grid fill. There you go. You can grid fill things in patches as well. And that may or may not work in everywhere, but I think you're getting the idea right about now that we can go through this and do some pretty good work relatively fast. So I'm going to take this one out right through here just for a second. And I want to see, I was trying to see how I could balance this area a little bit differently. This area here, I'm going to press F. Okay. I'm going to create like a tri-quad basically. Loop cuts there. When you add those loop cuts in, a lot of times you need to grab those edges and just press G and move a little bit and let it kind of sink back to where it needs to go. You can see these ones don't need to be way over here. It should be on top of that still. If you ever need to straighten things as well, machine tools, you can Alt A, straighten, press G and move, and it will actually snap back to the surface. You can also turn on surface slide temporary if you wanted to, with machine tools anyways. Which I made another video about, so we're not going to get into that on this one because we'd have to stop what we're doing, but certainly could utilize it. So now we just got to figure out how we want to hold this topo here. By the looks of it, it's going to be an N-gon. We're going to select the whole area and fill it. And if we would do a loop cut out to there, we can have these two meet. Something like that. And we can drag that edge straight through there. You cut an N-gon in half, it does turn into quads, okay? And we can just continue moving on with it, perhaps. This direction. Now, your model's going to come out looking a little soft after doing this, generally speaking. You could go back and you could bevel the hard edges, or you just keep modeling on it and coming up with new ideas on top of this as well. So, I think we'll merge those two. Keep them all as quads, okay. Retopo was fun in my opinion. I don't have any problem doing this because it's like easy subdivision to me. But some people don't like it, so it may not be for everybody. That would be a good place to add a loop cut. Another thing you might run into is you can notice that the resolution of the mesh is going up little by little here and there. Kind of messed that edge up, didn't we? It's just going up little by little all over. And that's the resolution of the mesh increasing basically. And so this is going to happen as you go through the whole model. So one of the things you want to do is, you know, take time to balance things, but learn about reduction methods. I went over this in a few videos. Topology Fundamentals, I think, still had it, but you can do reductions or redirections as well to keep your quad counts kind of manageable in certain areas. Like you can localize densities so that you don't go too dense everywhere, basically. Like we want to do a loop cut here. That'll be fine. Take that out there, put it up there, merge these two. That's good. Take that all the way over to there. This is going to get cut in half. Okay, now we can see what's going on right there. Kind of need a piece here. So let's try this. I think this is a good little spot to learn about this. We have an N-gon. All right, and we don't want to, like, if we cut this in half, creates the quads, but it becomes it's a little loose in here. It's not as dense as some of the other areas, perhaps. So maybe we don't want to run that edge out down here either because it might be too dense down there. Right, so what do we do in this area to make this work out for us? Well, we need to think about our edge flows, first of all. And a lot of this edge flow is doing, it's kind of its own thing right now. I wasn't thinking about it too heavily. But we definitely need to think about it as we're working. Alt-click these edges and just see they're going in the right directions, basically. For the most part, those could be better, perhaps, but... so this one here would go all the way through there, possibly. I don't like that. So we could do a redirect, maybe. So you can also redirect or do an end pull through this kind of mesh here. That would turn it into quads as well. So it's not just cutting it in half. And that could work out, but we could do a reduction maybe somewhere like right here. Okay, we might get away with that. So we can use a quad there. Looks something like so. Okay. And this one we can maybe just get rid of entirely. Or if we want to keep our details in that area a little bit more, we can kind of move this, balance it back out perhaps. But we could maybe, let's just take it and do a big chamfer real quick. Push those back out. You can just dissolve that edge. It'll do that number. So we might be able to take these ones out in this direction a little bit. You see, it's all about balancing now, right? We're trying to balance this area. I was trying not to send a whole edge out. I was going to do maybe something like an inset. So if you didn't want to send an edge out at all, let's say we just got rid of that. We had this whole area back to an N-gon. We could do something like this, where maybe we stop here. We'll get 2 end poles out of it. But you see how we can connect things up? It's just like a localized inset. It moves everything inwards, first of all. But you are capable of doing things like that. And I guess we could still run the edge out if we wanted to. Anyways, I had that going different when I was thinking about it, but let's see. We could merge these. All of them. We get a triangle. Got a quad here now. I don't know how that one's going to work out. We'll see. Get another triangle back here. What can we do with that? Obviously going out is the best answer. But you can do some really bizarre and wild stuff, basically. Because, let's go back to the N-gon. I was trying to prove something here. I have an N-gon going. And we do like basically like a 3-to-1. And we could do all kinds of weird stuff too. Like we wanted to run our topology all over the mesh. Like we can do that. Like quad, quad, quad. You see, like just because you can do it, it's all quads doesn't always mean it's great topo. But guess what? That is in fact all quads. So if we wanted to add a detail there, bring the model back. It's hard to see it without it. Okay, if we wanted to add a detail here later, you could turn snapping off. And maybe you do like an inset here. Alt S these in. You see where we're going with that one? So now let's go ahead and just subdivide it one time and / to isolate it. Right? We're working out this kind of quality of mesh anyways. There's certainly places where we can try to optimize. So even if we sculpted something and it looked a certain way, if we don't have to match it 100%, we could definitely go through and start doing stuff like this all day. So in edit mode, let's turn that off now. You'll have to spend some time on the remesh though. And there's other little key things you can do as well, like adding creases still. Okay, or doing set flows, like you could set flow, use a set flow add-on. If you want something to remain a little bit more curvy, you can do things like that. You can Alt S them out, Control V, smooth vertices. Maybe we want a slight ridge here, so we can do a crease on this. Don't set it to 1, maybe like 0.8 or something. So when that subdivides, we get this really nice sharp piece like that. Right. We'll join these two back up. Okay, and you can also use loop tools to do some fun stuff, like you can flatten surfaces like that, right? And so later on, if you want to crease these, you see where we're going with this? Like we're not stuck with what we see is what we get. Like we're still working on our mesh at this point. So this is a really tried and true technique that just you do not see commonly explained on YouTube anyways. I've seen a couple people doing time lapses on YouTube, but not really just talking about it that much on how you can just keep working these meshes. So it's just something to think about and explore the idea of using this in your own workflow, perhaps. Right? Let's try 0.8 here and see what happens. Yeah, sometimes these get a little squirrely. You have to use more resolution than you probably want to, but it can happen. So one here at 0.8. Okay. 0.8 here. So the moment you add a symmetrize to this, it suddenly becomes a whole lot more awesome. Once you see it all starting to get put together, basically. This whole section here, this whole outer section anyways, I'm going to add a loop cut and press E. So this is all nice and even now. And this one that we just created, I'm going to press E, makes it even. You can press F to flip which edge it's even with. You can hit 0.8, crease that a little bit. All right, we almost got it the way I want it. Let's Alt S it out just a tiny bit. And that crease should be a little bit more visible now. So we get some really nice details that we otherwise wouldn't necessarily have. So we can Shift S, do a solidify. And this is taking place after everything. That subdivision, I would prefer doing last, but we'd have to bevel it, I think. So let's do all, that's the UVs and then keep corners. Okay, see how that affected the bottoms there? Usually smooths them out. Keep corners does that. Okay. I feel like I just want to bring this all the way around to increase that. I don't know. It just seems like it'd be a good idea. Let's do a 0.8. Yeah. I wish you could like fade them out predictably a little bit, but it doesn't really do that, I don't think. You gotta kind of tweak them on and off or whatever. You see, like this one would have to be, oh, like a point, whatever, really small. This will be a little bit more. This will be a little bit more. And then you'll get like a stepping effect sometimes. So it doesn't look that convincing. The good news is that when you're making this kind of stuff, you could just do the 0.8 and go all the way through with it. This is one of the main reasons why you might want to work this way. Is we're using a subdivision. Let's get rid of that. You can also use multi-resolutions. And you can see the mirror take an effect. The multi-res goes first, the mirror takes effect second. Kind of meh. So apply the mirror with a bisect. It's going to complain because the multi-res is in front of it. You might have to redo the multi-res. This can be a little bit finicky. But basically, the multi-res, you can subdivide it, right? And you can see it's actually picking up on the creases, right? You can actually tell it to or not to. We can't change any of these settings as far as I'm aware after. Oh, maybe we can. As we start, it's grayed out. I don't know if that's an error or you just can do this, I guess. But usually before you do all that, you know, you add the multi-res and you could change it to boundary smooth all, UV smooth all, and use creases. You have to play with UV smooth when you're doing more organic stuff, right? If you have seams going across smooth surfaces, usually you got to do like a pre-smooth subdivision, so it's kind of weird. But anyways, the thing here is that once we start subdividing it with the multi-res, we could take it up extremely high poly if we wanted to. Like, we can go just keep going for the most part. 2 million, that's fine. This is what I'm talking about. Like, we can actually work this way if we wanted to. So if we wanted to do some surfacing, this is when you get those zebra stripes going. Okay, you can use the smooth tool, and the smooth tool you can set it to surface. And you could try to work out little minor errors perhaps if you needed to on the surface here. Sometimes you got to crank the strength and click a lot. But eventually you'll start correcting it little by little, which is kind of interesting. Possibly. Now, you could also do it at a lower resolution. It'll take effect faster. But here's the thing. Go back to a matte cap that I was using. All right, now you just use smooth laplation. Turn it really low strength, maybe. You know, we can kind of go through here and just smooth some things, perhaps. Maybe get them to not crease quite as heavily in those areas. Maybe turn the strength up on this one. Yeah. But once again, we're sculpting again, so we have to be very careful with what we're doing, because we could flatten the surface by accident or make it look lumpy or whatever the case, right? And so you see, we can start to work little details out perhaps. So some guys are going through the process of modeling, where they just do a subdivision mesh and then they throw a multi-res on, and then they'll use these as additional modeling tools basically, because now we still have access to like the mask tool, for example. The mask tool has a pie menu, it's the A key. By the default settings for it, I think I like them personally. So, but you can just go ahead and if you wanted to go in here and start masking things out, perhaps. And try not to get too carried away with it being super sharp. But if you wanted to, you certainly can go through and do things like this. You can see as we go further back, it's getting bigger. But whatever the case, A, invert it. We can use mesh filter. We can do things like inflate. We can push them all in just ever so slightly. Press A, shrink mask. You see it does it way too far, so turn that off. I wish it was off by default. You could just grow it up by iterations of 2. And now you can do a mesh filter smooth. And if you want to just smooth it in there a little bit, you can. You press A, clear, boom. All right, so if you had hard surface alphas, this is probably the better way of going with things. There's an add-on called Sculpt Alphas Manager. Kind of hard to install because Git, when you get things off Git, you don't use like the zip file from Git. You got to download like the release versions. But this Sculpt Alphas Manager, pretty simple. You grab something, an alpha, like you direct it to a folder. You can put alphas in there. Set it to area plane, do fall off constant. For the most part, you just change your stroke to either drag dots or anchored. And you'll see if we do drag dots, we can just click and drag around. So instead of sculpting some things, it's probably better to do this. But you can also use anchored, it's just fine. You can turn symmetry back on if you wanted, which we didn't have going. And oh, I'm going to talk about that in a second. But we can do anchored if we wanted. That's the main thing, right? Set it to negative, turn the strength down, start in the middle. You can see if we line them up very carefully, we should get a good result here. Well, maybe not that one. Let's get it right on each other. There we go. And so we can't even do the symmetry if we want to. All right. And hopefully you have enough resolution to go ahead and use this for your high poly bake later on. Now, more than likely what's going to happen is you will apply this, you will probably decimate it, okay? And when you decimate, I'm not going to kick it on right now, it's going to cause too much problems, I think. Just set it to something that's reasonable, where you maintain the quality, but you lose a lot of the triangles, or you're not at 2 million or plus whatever face counts or whatever. Take it down to like 500,000, 200,000, somewhere in there would be better. And you can bake this as a high poly to a low poly, right? At some point. So you'd have to make another low poly cage around this thing. But the low polys are literally, like, you could use your Retopo for the most part and just use that instead, because this is kind of like working a low poly to a high of sorts. Anyways, so when we are doing this, you'll notice that we didn't have mirror on. All right, and there's times that things will screw up like this, okay? Especially on symmetry with the multi-res. So even if you had symmetry checked on potentially, and you're trying to mirror it, right? When you have mirror and scope mode and symmetry's on, it doesn't always mirror correctly. You can take this mesh and you can symmetrize with Mesh Machine or use a mirror modifier possibly. Send it over, okay? And it will transfer the data to the other side as well. So you can still symmetrize, guys. It just has to be done very particularly. In a worst case scenario, you might get some weird hiccups here in the middle. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Still a possibility, right? So you want to make some really cool hard surface stuff with super high quality and detail. This is where you're going to probably want to go, like especially sci-fi stuff, because you can design all day with those little guide meshes, those sculpt guide meshes, if you would, and then work them out to a much higher resolution, much higher quality later on as needed. So pretty simple and straightforward, I think, but I'll let you determine if you need to use these techniques or these tools for your projects. And so I hope you enjoyed. I'll check you out in the next one. All right, take care.